Michael Kaskey-Blomain going to join us from CBS Sports. We'll talk a little bit about Embiid, the news that we got there, but the upcoming schedule and other things as well as he joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda hotline. And, man, what a difference 24 hours makes in Cleveland to Philadelphia. Same dimensions of the court, 10 feet high, and yet it seems that they just can't get it right on the road there, man. I don't know if you have a hypothesis. I don't know that anybody can really give a true, actual, accurate answer to why they play so well at home and on the road. But, hey, when they play like they did last night, Harris and Horford, and Shake Milton's been playing really good, MKB, this team is tough whether they have Embiid, Simmons, or not.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Mike. It's like like you said, it's like a roller coaster. One night you abandon all hope on the team, and then 24 hours later, you see some guys, step up and live up to their potential, and you start to think, all right, well, if you have a healthy Ben, a healthy Joel, and you can get production like that out of Tobias, out of a Shake, maybe this team still has a chance. But I've never, it's like you said on the intro there, I've never seen anything quite like a team being, so dominant at home, 28-2. Best home record in the league, and then so poor, 9-21 on the road at this point. There's obviously the usual explanations that you would have. You get up more to play in front of your home crowd, lack of concentration, things like that. But the disparity there is definitely a head scratcher.
There's no question about it. And I saw a stat last night, Michael, and I don't know if you saw this or not, but 28-2. They have two 14-game winning streaks at home. There's only 3 other teams that have done that in history, and 2 of those 3 won the NBA title. That's how dominant they are at home. The Warriors of 2015, the Lakers of 2000, and the other team that didn't win the championship was the LeBron Cavaliers that lost to the Magic in 2009. That's how good the Sixers have been at home. I don't know if that's enough, though, for you or the fans to suggest that their home success still makes you a believer.
I think it's enough to, keep you from completely abandoning hope. Like you said, they're in all-time territory in terms of how good they are at home. And, in the playoffs, if they're able to play, if they're able to move up to a 4 spot potentially in the East and avoid, excess amount of road games, which obviously is about to be tougher without their 2 best players. But, the question is, at some point, you're probably going to have to win on the road. And I think that's, maybe why people are still skeptical despite how good they are at home. You almost expected them last night to bounce back from that Cleveland loss and, beat a Knicks team, considering the fact that it was at home. But if it was in New York, I feel like the question would still exist: are they going to beat this team? So ultimately, I think to be a championship team, you're going to have to win on the road, unless you're, the top seed in the conference like the Bucks, which the Sixers aren't. So I do think, I think it's fair to still have some hope that the team could still reach as high as people thought they would. But also that question still exists. Are they going to be able to go out? And especially, if they lose to a team like Cleveland on the road in the playoffs, you're going to have to go to a Toronto, to a Milwaukee, to a Boston, and pull out a game there. They just haven't given you a lot of reason to feel confident in their ability to do that so far this season.
On Wednesday night, the quote-unquote stars, Horford, Harris, those guys did not step up. And Brett Brown, I thought, seemingly was annoyed. He said C- effort. And then, of course, you got the people who say it's the coach's fault that he didn't get that team ready or amped back up once Embiid went out. And I would suggest, look, you're Tobias Harris making $180 million, and Al Horford, you got to have some personal pride. If you need the coach to tell you it's your turn to step up, that's ridiculous. However, do you think last night that that Brown did light into them and say that was unacceptable what happened the other night? You guys are now the leaders without those guys. Step up and act like it.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. I don't know if, maybe not in those exact words, but I definitely think that there was a message that he got across to those two specifically. The team as a whole, obviously, he's said over the past few days that it's that's why we have a team when he's been asked about how to, bounce back without Ben and Joel. But I think those two specifically, the message was, listen, like, this is why we brought you guys in here. You need to, do more than a combined 21 points like you had against the Cavaliers on Wednesday night. So I think that message definitely got across, and now it's just a matter of, in the short term, if they can continue to give an effort like that and keep the Sixers afloat. Obviously, they got a couple of tough games coming up against the Lakers and the Clippers out west. It's going to be, tough to get a win without their main guys. But in a way, this could be an opportunity for the team. We've gotten pretty good at being optimistic about injuries over the past couple of years with the Sixers, but it could be a way, as Brett kind of implied last night after the game, for the team to have some other guys, gain a little bit of comfort, maybe that they didn't have with Ben and Joel in there. Just get more used to the flow and how they can contribute to the team. So hopefully when those two come back, maybe that Al's a little bit more comfortable in his role, whatever that is, and Tobias is feeling a little bit more confident to, not go out and get 34 probably when Ben and Joel are in there, but be able to make some big shots and feel confident in his ability to, put the ball in the basket.
And I can understand that concept, Michael, but here's the problem. Much like when people said, hey, when Embiid was out, a couple of weeks ago, it was, well, Horford can now play, get some comfortability. Here's the problem. Once Embiid comes back, he's got to move back into another role again that he didn't seem all that comfortable. So he might feel comfortable in the role without Embiid, but once Embiid comes back, if he gains some comfortability, now he's going back to trying to find his way with Embiid back. So I don't know how they continue to keep doing this, and it's like the same thing as you keep changing the roster, and some of it's injury, some of it's trades, some of it's all these different roster moves. I contend you had 3 different GMs trying to put this team together, and you have 3 different visions, but all of it plays into part of they just can't get any continuity. So yeah, Tobias Harris might feel more comfortable. He shot 21 shots, 14 and 21. But is he going to be aggressive enough to shoot 14 shots when Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid are here?
Yeah, that's the question, Mike. And obviously, I think the hope is that they get some sort of momentum. Obviously, even though the role is not exactly the same, that they, find some confidence and some momentum that they can kind of parlay into, moving forward when those guys are back in the lineup. Mm-hmm. But it is, something that other contenders haven't really had to deal with as much in terms of the roster turnover that the Sixers had. And that's a great point that you bring up. And I think it's a real issue that's been affecting this team. It's one thing to acquire a lot of talent and put it together, but there's certainly something to be said about, if you just look at the top of the East at a team like Milwaukee, who's been, building a roster for several years with basically the same core pieces and, shifting smaller things, or a team like the Raptors, who obviously outside of Kawhi coming and going for one season has a core that they've been building around, things like that. I think the Sixers have had, a struggle with being able to just have an identity and have these guys in place, because it seems like every 4 or 5 months, there's new guys popping up in the roster and in the rotation. And some of that is just going to be par for the course, I think, when you're building your team around Joel Embiid. Unfortunately, we all knew ever since Kansas coming out of college that, injuries were going to play a part in his in his career in the pros, and it's proven, as good as he is, it is difficult to, construct a championship caliber team when you don't necessarily, you can't have full confidence that your key piece is going to be there night in and night out. Like this past week, Ben goes out, and then we're like, all right, this is a great time for Joel to step out and, do his thing. And then 5 minutes into the first game, he's hurt. And unfortunately, whether it's bad luck or not, whatever, it gets attributed to, that's been the story with Joel throughout his career so far. And I think that's a big factor. And it's really tough to, just build out a roster when you have to have an emergency, like a backup plan in Al Horford, and then he's in and out of the lineup, and you got to shift guys and put them in positions where they're not familiar. And I think that, it definitely takes a toll on the roster.
Couple things. Let's start with Embiid. The news was encouraging, it sounds like. Now, I say encouraging. That doesn't mean it's definitive that he's going to be back anytime soon, but no structural damage. Last night, Brett Brown said, look, he's looking forward to this run home, the final third, the responsibility of not having Ben. So this to learn this is exciting news. That's what Brown said last night. Paraphrasing, in regards to no structural damage. Do you have any sense, Michael Kaskey-Blomain, CBS Sports covers the 76ers, any sense on the time frame that we could see Joel Embiid? Do you anticipate that he flies out west with the team?
I don't think he'll fly out west with the team, Mike, and I think that week a week for an evaluation was pretty conservative. I don't think that anyone expects to see him necessarily back out on the court in a week. Obviously, that would be a best-case scenario. But I think Brett, a lot of the relief in the organization was, just as you said, that there was no structural damage, which I think was a real concern on Wednesday night. I think the way that Joel, obviously, we saw the game. He was clearly in pain, missed the 2 free throws, and then, didn't return. I think there was some concern that this could be an injury that lasts a couple months, and at that point you're talking about heading into April, into the playoffs. And if, all the struggles they've had aside, if you're going into the playoffs without Joel or with Joel not at close to 100 or, close to a solid percentage of how he can be, you're really in trouble. So I think that the relief comes from the fact that, he'll be out for at least mid-March is my guess. I think, conservatively, I think he'll be out for at least a couple weeks. But then hopefully he'll be back in and pretty close to, his normal self well before the playoffs start. So I think at this point, for the Sixers, it's just a matter of, the playoff positioning probably isn't going to be what they had hoped, and the timing isn't great because coming out of the All-Star break, you're in a fight for, home court advantage, just neck and neck with Miami. You want to be able to kind of put the foot on the gas and separate yourself a bit, and that's going to be, obviously harder to do without Ben and Joel in the lineup. But at this point for the Sixers, as we said multiple times, and Brett has said, it's a team that's built for the playoffs. And I think at this point, the whole focus for them moving forward this season is going to be making sure Ben and Joel are as healthy as possible come April. And even if that means, sacrificing some wins in the regular season and in turn sacrificing, the 4 spot or even the 5 spot.
All right, MKB, let's get into Ben Simmons. I want to hear let you hear a cut from Brian Windhorst, and then I'll have you react to it in just a second. He said this recently.
The way that they're dancing around this Simmons thing and the way all the other parties involved are not being specific makes me worry about what's really going on there.
All right, so he's saying, it seems a little quiet over there. You feel that it's a little odd that no one's really said how this happened, what's going on, the time frame here. Yeah, there's a time frame, but it doesn't seem like, hey, he did this at practice and we know what happened, and because we saw it, we know it could be this.
Yeah, Mike, I think there's reason for concern, like Brian said. I just think with as you're very familiar with, obviously the injury history with the this organization and the way some of the injuries have been handled in the past, and then combined with the fact that with the way this injury occurred coming out of the All-Star break, where he played almost 30 minutes in the All-Star game and was fine, and then he missed the game due to the back soreness. So there was obviously something going on there. And then a game later, he's back in, and then very quickly gets hurt in that game and comes out. So that leads you to wonder how the injury was diagnosed and handled to begin with. Was this something that they probably should have given him more time for, or a deeper diagnosis, and they kind of just brush it off and let him back in there? Is it something that's totally a separate issue altogether? And it's just at this point, no one really knows. But I think with the way things have been handled in the past, I think it's right to be skeptical. And until there's a concrete timetable, I definitely think it's an area of concern for the Sixers.
What do you make of that, Michael? That all right, they have the All-Star break. He plays in the game, and it's not like he just made a cameo. He played 29 minutes in the game, and then all of a sudden he's ruled out for the first game following the All-Star break, which was a little bit like, that's weird. He just played in the All-Star game. Then he's ready to play the very next night. He comes out. He looks okay. He plays 5 minutes, and then he has to leave. And then he's out for, 4 weeks here. So it's like, was there a practice in there that something happened? Like, where was there a time for him to do something from the All-Star game, which he played and obviously wasn't injured in that game, to not being able to play on Wednesday or Thursday night against the Nets?
No, that's a great question, obviously, Mike. And from what I've heard, this is not official, but what I've heard was that it happened at the team practice the day before that Thursday game. So their first
Wednesday practice.
Right, the Wednesday practice at the center, he tweaked it or whatever happened, and he was initially listed as questionable for that Thursday game I believe it was against the Nets. He was first listed as questionable, and then ultimately ruled out for that game, like you said, and then was good to go, cleared to play the next game. So at that point, it's it's a question of how was that injury like handled and diagnosed in the first place? It just makes you kind of scratch your head, because if it was something that, obviously he's losing a lot of time now, obviously was it something that probably should have cost him a little bit more time, at the beginning? But if he had rested 3 games, would he have avoided this possible injury? This is, that's obviously speculation, but I do think it's definitely a little bit, odd or, weird how that timeline has gone down.
Yeah, and it's weird because, as you mentioned, that he was held out of the game against the Nets. So somebody looked at him and said, look, you're not healthy enough to be cleared to play tonight. Right. And then looked at him again and said, okay, you are healthy enough. So did he aggravate it more in the Bucks game by playing? And is it something that they said, look, if you would have just sat out for – I mean, we're obviously speculating and just kind of shouting stuff out loud here, but it just seems odd that he would not have been cleared, then was cleared, and now is out. Because there wasn't even like a contact or anything that caused him to leave the game against the Bucks. He just kind of came up lame.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. And it brings back memories of the situation with Joel a few years ago, his first year, where he was dealing with, a knee injury, and then he ended up ultimately coming back and playing in a nationally televised game against the Houston Rockets.
Yes.
And then ended up doing, further damage to the knee and ended up having to miss a large chunk of the stretch run. So, that was one of the first things that this situation kind of reminded me of. And given the track record, obviously, of this team's medical staff over the past few recent years, you have to, like you said, just kind of be skeptical of how this timeline, went down.
Michael Kaskey-Blomain, CBS Sports. All right, the one guy who you felt was going to kind of be out of the rotation after the trades maybe was Shake Milton. What has Shake Milton done over the last 3 nights to maybe put a wrench into Brett Brown's thought process once he has a full roster again?
I think the first thing, Mike, is he just shot really well. He's knocked down threes. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think he was, 5 for 5 from long distance last night, or a really good percentage, and the same the night before. So that's, obviously this team shooting for them is always at a premium, even though they just traded for 2 shooters from Golden State. Neither of those guys have, not necessarily their own fault. The playing time has been limited, but they haven't, necessarily established themselves as knockdown shooters that are going to be difference makers for the Sixers in the playoffs. So, what the team has needed for years, honestly, but especially this season, has been guys that are capable of making plays with the ball in their hand and that can shoot the ball. And Shake has kind of, provided a bit of that. He's been able to get in and create for some other guys, get into the paint, and then knock down shots. So, that's a skill set that the Sixers need. And he's, like you said, a guy that you didn't necessarily think would be taking a step forward after these new guys were acquired, but the injuries have opened up the opportunity for him. And that's where you kind of look at the silver lining and say, hey, maybe, Brett Brown's obviously not confident in Neto. He got rid of Trey Burke. They didn't add another point guard at the deadline. So maybe this opportunity with Ben out will give Shake some of that confidence that he could step into that, backup spot behind Ben and play some meaningful minutes in the postseason.
All right. What about the Glenn Robinson III stuff? I mean, he says, I don't know what my role is. I wasn't explaining. I thought Brown, he squashed that pretty quickly, was like, listen, dude, everybody was explained. I mean, I thought he was pretty adamant in denial that everybody was told their role, including you. You might not be happy with the role I gave you, but don't blame me for you not being happy, and not to mention not performing when being asked. You shot 40% with the Warriors. Here you're shooting 0%. That's a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. And like you said, Brett squashed that as quickly as you really see him squash anything. I don't think that he was happy with that perception being out there. That the roles on the team are undefined on top of everything else that's going on. Like you said, also, you understand his frustration since the playing time has been cut in half, but the production also hasn't been there. But I think over the next couple of weeks, the first few weeks of March up to April, a big part for Brett is going to have to be, to figure out and make the roles. I'm sure they had an idea of what they were expected of on the court, but the roles still aren't super clearly defined, and these injury issues obviously don't help. It's not, Brett obviously had a tough time for him to balance things when he's missing his two best players. But ultimately, you have to trim down the rotation, and the guys going into the postseason have to know, things can change game in and game out, but pretty much you want to have a pretty clear delineation of what your job is going to be night in, night out, when you're probably going to check in, how long you're going to play, and that hasn't been the case for the reserves, for a lot of this season. So I think Glenn obviously probably spoke out of turn a little bit, but his point isn't totally lost, meaning that, he joined a team with championship aspirations. And I think at this point, largely due to the injuries, the roles for the guys that aren't necessarily the stars could be a little bit more defined, and they probably will be over the coming weeks.
Well, and would you be in agreement with me that Glenn Robinson III has been given some opportunities and really hasn't shown that he deserves the playing? I'm disappointed in him. I thought he would be a nice catch-and-shoot guy.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say both him and Burks, I think, have been a little bit underwhelming since they've come here. But, I try to view it a little bit from the situation where they've been plugged in. It's probably a little bit difficult to not have the same rhythm that they had in Golden State. But, yeah, he hasn't obviously produced at the level that you would like, and he's had, opportunities.
I just didn't like, Michael, you got a guy who said he didn't like his role and that he was playing on a free agent situation in Golden State, and that it makes it sound as if, hey, and I get it, you want to make money, but it makes it sound as if, hey, I would rather just be in Golden State to lose but make more money and have a bigger role than come here and win potentially but have a smaller role. That's what it sounded more like to me. Not that I don't know my role. It's this guy's ruining the money I could have made in free agency. That's what really drew the red flags for me.
Yeah, that's a great point, Mike, and I took it that way also. It did seem like that he was saying how much he was, the points and the time that he was getting in Golden State, but that's a team obviously that's at the bottom of the Western Conference, going nowhere near the playoffs. And if the opportunities are going to come at one point or another. If if you watch playoff basketball long enough, the opportunity is going to be there. So he has a chance to step up and make, on a stage that he wouldn't have had otherwise, even if he had stayed in Golden State. And a lot of guys get that paycheck off what they do in April, May, and potentially June. So, I definitely agree with you there. I think it's probably a comment that he, probably shouldn't have made publicly if he had an issue with the role. Going to Elton and Brett probably would have been the better, of course.
Michael Kaskey-Blomain, of course, CBS Sports covers the Sixers in the NBA at the Real Mike KB. It's Sixers heading out on the road, so they will play at L.A., the Clippers. Not fun. And, of course, you beat the Clippers here right before the All-Star break. They will follow that up. That is the Sunday game on 97.3 ESPN. Tuesday night, they're at the Lakers. They beat the Lakers here. Not fun to go out there and play a back-to-back game at the Staples. Then they're at Sacramento, a team that's been playing better. And at Golden State just changed a little bit, Michael, because you might get Steph Curry in that game. This could be an ugly 4-game road trip.
Yeah, it really could be, and it's unfortunate, especially those two against the Clippers and the Lakers. Like you said, they won both those games here, and you really would like to see how the Sixers at full strength stack up against two of the probably the top two teams in the West, two teams that if they were able to get out of the East could be a potential finals matchup. So it's unfortunate. I don't think without Ben or Joel, anybody's really expecting them to win, either of those games. And then the Kings have been playing good, and if Steph Curry's back, he's always liable to go off for 30 or 40. So there's a chance, you don't want to say it, but it wouldn't be the most shocking if they, went 0-4 on another road trip. But I think best case scenario, maybe they get the 2-2 split with, win those second two games.
All right, man. I will, man, it's going to be a while before they're back home. They do not come back home till March 11th. That's a game against Detroit. They followed it up against Indiana, then Washington and Toronto. So a 4-game road trip out west before a 4-game homestand. And then they have, Michael, one of the easiest schedules. I think it's the second easiest schedule in the league remaining coming up. So with or without Joel and Ben, they should be able to pick up some wins here. I know it's tough to predict, but would you say the 5 seed or other when they start the playoffs?
Well, a couple of days ago when we were talking, Mike, I was pretty confident saying that they would get the 4 seed, just considering that Miami's been playing really poorly and the Sixers, I think, are a better team overall. But with the injuries now and the unknown timetables for both the guys, I think 5th seed is probably the best bet. I think it will be a little bit hard to pass the Heat at this point. So yeah,
the Heat have not been playing very well either.
No, not at all. 3-7 over their last 10. So that's why, if they had Ben and Joel, I would say without hesitation the Sixers will move past them in the standings. But now it's a crapshoot.
Michael Kaskey-Blomain, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Michael, I'll see you soon, bud.
Thanks, Mike. Have a great weekend, man.
You do the same. And, of course, when the Sixers play, we have them here on 97.3 ESPN.